Welcome to Alternative Dog Moms Podcast. I'm Kimberly Gauthier, the creator of Keep the Tail Wagging. For the past 9 years, I've been blogging about raw feeding, pet wellness, and life as a crazy dog mom. I've seen massive improvements in my dog's health since I started raising my dogs naturally, and I'm passionate about sharing my experience to help other pet parents.
I'm Erin Scott. For the past 9 years, I've been researching and learning everything I can about healing cancer, allergies, autoimmune, and mystery illnesses in both my dogs and myself. And I can't wait to share with you everything I've learned on this journey. As the Alternative Dog Moms, we're bringing you all the latest dog health news that we're following and sharing the tips, tricks, and resources we learn along the way. Now, let's get started. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Erin.
Happy Raw Feeding Week to you.
I know, yes, I know. It's National Raw Feeding Week. No one seems to care but me.
That's not true.
I mean, it really didn't take off the way I thought it would.
Well, we are here today with two other people who care.
I really thought it was going to be this big deal when I came up with the idea. I don't even remember when I came up with the idea to do this, but
It was 5 years ago.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay.
But we are joined today with two very special guests. So we are joined by Krista and Jessica. So do you guys want to say hello and introduce yourselves?
Hey, Jessica, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jessica. I am in Orlando, Florida. I run a co-op down here in Orlando and have been raw feeding, for probably about the past 10 years and have been running the co-op here since 2017. So I definitely remember, all the good old days, getting started and all of that. So thank you for having me.
Hi, Krista. Welcome.
Hi. I'm Krista. I'm the owner of Vibrant Canine Raw Dog Food. Happy National Raw Feeding Week. I look forward to this every year. I'm absolutely enthralled with it because what I love watching every year is people's, Joe and I were talking tonight before here about this, and is that nothing is absolute, right? Nothing that we do is absolute, and that we have to be so fluid. So I love watching every year and how we progress, right? Mm-hmm. And how the new things that we learn, or some other harebrained idea that we come up with, right? Something, but I love that. So it's always, I look forward to this week.
Yay. Well, thank you.
And so Kimberly, you actually started this, right? Like you're kind of the one that invented it.
I did. I came up with the idea to do National Raw Feeding Week. Well, first I was looking at the calendar and, because every year pet bloggers all around the world, we look at a pet calendar, and it's really helpful in creating content. So I know that February is Dental Health Awareness Month. And so I know what products to promote, content to make, what I'm going to put on social media. It's just a really easy way to get started when you're creating your content calendar. And one year I was just like, it would be cool if there was something for raw feeding. And in my head, I was just like, ooh, I should come up with a raw feeding day. And I was like, no, we deserve a week. I don't know if Rawgust was already a thing, but I didn't know about it. I heard about Rawgust from Emma Rutherford like a couple years later. But I did National Raw Feeding Week, and I decided to do it the first week of April because April is when I started feeding raw 10 years ago. And I figure April 1st through 7th would be an easy thing to remember. And I actually went online to find out how to create a holiday, and you have to spend like $15,000 to $25,000 to do this. And I'm just like, how did the dental health awareness people do it? They didn't. I don't think some random dentist somewhere created that and spent that much money. So I just sent an email to all the websites that had pet calendars and asked them to add it, and they did. I didn't have to pay a dime, and there you go. And I think someone might have added it to Wikipedia too. So yeah, I don't know. I looked when it happened and was like, "Ooh, look at that!" But I've never looked to see if it's been removed or anything. So.
Well, I saw that Real Dog Box has been celebrating also, so it's not just
Ruby is awesome. She's like the only one who reaches out to me like a month or two beforehand to say, what are you doing for National Raw Feeding Week? And usually this week I'm interviewing people. I start interviewing people in February and I release videos every week. And last year I decided that would be the last year that I would do that because it's so much work. It's not fun at all. And I get lazy by the end. Like I did a video with Rodney and I didn't edit it for like 8 months. And finally, and I was going to break it up into pieces. And then I was just like, I don't even want to be bothered. I just uploaded it to YouTube and went about my business. So ladies, raw feeding is the topic of the day. I will go first. We're going to just talk about why we started, when we started, why we started, and what was really hot, like the hot conversation of the time when we started that we remember. So I started in 2013, this month, because my veterinarian said Rodrigo was probably going to die shortly after his 3rd birthday. And I remember this because, I'd had years of issues, ear infections, skin rashes, itchy paws, loose stool and diarrhea on a daily basis. It was just, I could not figure anything out with this dog. I kept taking him to the vet. The veterinarian is prescribing antibiotics almost every visit. I did not know the damage that the antibiotics were doing. I didn't understand why whenever he got well, a few weeks would go by and then it would all come rushing back even worse than before. And the veterinarian we just never talked about diet or anything like that. And he wasn't very open to conversations. He tended to be the type of person that pointed to a degree on the wall to show that he was the expert in the room. And how dare I bring my Google knowledge and ask him questions. So when he told me that my dog was going to die, and he shook his head sadly and was like, this is what you get with these mixed breed dogs. They're just not very good. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Because his sister comes here too, and she's perfectly healthy. I mean, well, anyway, I had already been hearing about raw feeding, and I decided to start doing the research and got quickly overwhelmed, did not understand what I was supposed to be doing, tried a recipe that someone gave me, which gave all of my dogs diarrhea. It was just a hot mess. And then someone told me, why don't you just order from Darwin's, which is in our backyard? So I did. And that's our story. Oh, and the hot topic of the time, vegetables. How dare you feed vegetables to your dogs? I used to love, my friend Tina and I started feeding raw at the same time. And that's how we met was, we were asking the same questions in the same places and we just connected and we're still friends today. In fact, I was just texting her before we started, but Tina and I would sit in raw feeding groups and just laugh. And then, we would dare each other, ask about vegetables and see how long before they kick you out. And one day we did it. I don't know where I was flying to, maybe to Super Zoo. But when I got off the plane, I had a text message from her saying, did you get kicked out? Because you're not in the group anymore. And I'm like, damn it, that didn't take long at all. So that's all. So Erin, tell me.
So I first heard about raw feeding in 2008. And I was just telling Jessica, because she actually knows the person who is one of the people that introduced me to raw feeding. And I was volunteering with this great group of dog owners here in Baltimore, and they were talking about it. And I mean, I so didn't know anything at that time, and for a long time, we had just been buying, kibble in the grocery store. And in 2007, of course, there had been the huge pet food recall. And then that was when I really started paying attention and buying like the good kibble, and so, I mean, this all just blew my mind when I first heard about raw, and I started looking into it. And me, I'm researching everything online and, found Dr. Billinghurst, and I'm reading all this stuff. And I was like, I really want to do this. It makes so much sense. And Tim and I had been starting to try to improve our own diets and trying to get away from processed foods. And I'm like, okay, this makes so much sense to me, for the dogs too. But like the idea of trying to do it myself blew my mind. I still don't do it myself. And so I wanted to purchase it, and we just couldn't afford it at that time. So it took until we paid Tim's Jeep off in 2013. It was in August of 2013 that we paid his Jeep off, in September of 2013 when I started feeding raw. And one of my girlfriends was a distributor for Canine Craving, which is a raw dog food here in Baltimore. And that was the first time we ever fed. And I feel like I've avoided a lot of the drama, but to me, the thing that always stands out as like the most controversial thing is about whether you feed bones or not to feed bones, or what bones do you feed. And because I really learned it as barf and, bones and raw food diet. And so that was like something that always like kind of blew my mind. And I was like, I don't know, do you do it? Do you not do it? I don't know. I'm just going to buy this thing that's already made, because I was like having like a meltdown about it. And so Lucy and Kahlua were our first dogs, and they were both seniors by the time I fed, we started feeding them raw, and they both probably like a year or so later, I don't think it all related to the raw food, started having health issues. But I definitely got into it with the vet that we went to, and he was like so not on board with anything that I was doing. And I had started taking one of my dogs to acupuncture, and he called me a witch doctor. And I mean, he was very combative. And obviously we don't go there anymore, but they had been our vet for like 10 years, And so this was like crazy to me that I was getting all this pushback. But yeah, that's kind of how this all started.
Yay. Okay, Jessica, tell us your story.
So I got my start about 10 years ago. I had been researching initially, just like, what's the healthiest food for my dogs? We had 3 dogs. We had a German short-haired pointer with like the worst ears ever, just constant ear infections, constant skin infections. And then we had Charlie, my Yorkie poo, who he came down with Addison's around his 3rd birthday, and so he had kind of like his own host of health issues. And then I had my American Eskimo, who was relatively healthy, but he was still, I really just was looking for whatever was going to be best for him. So I initially found Dr. Karen Becker, kind of started educating myself, and a lot of start and stop in the beginning, because initially I was like, I'm going to try these recipes and I'm going to try to do this myself. And I got way overwhelmed. And then eventually I found a brand that, the local pet store sold. And so I started getting into that, but I finally found a co-op when we were living in Virginia. And this was probably around 2013, 2014. And that was Oma's Pride. And we started feeding that to our dogs, and they started doing so well, that just all aspects of their health. I was just, the itching really kind of went away, and, the constant ear infections really kind of got just a lot better. And then, so we moved to Florida back in 2017, and I was like, I'm just going to Google it and find a co-op down here. And turns out there really wasn't a co-op for that brand. So I called that company and I said, I want to distribute your food. And so I started working with them, because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to feed my dogs if I don't have, something like that. Because, my thing was I work full time, and I really didn't have the time to do a lot of the do-it-yourself meals. And every now and then I would, but for the most part, I really needed something, kind of complete. And, the thing I remember the most about, especially when I first got started, was the battle between BARF versus PMR versus complete meals. That was like such a hot topic. And I feel like it still kind of can be in some of the raw feeding groups. So, that's how I got my start. And we've been doing it ever since.
What about you, Krista?
Well, we are like the 10-year group here. I have a little bit of a different story that I actually thought all of us would have more, because I feel like it's all I ever hear. I had lost at that time one dog to cancer. Then my 5-year-old English Mastiff got diagnosed that threw us. I had zero idea that he had it. And we went to the vet. I thought he'd pulled a muscle. And she came back in and she said, he's got maybe a couple weeks left. I'm like, what are you talking about? I literally, my knees buckled, and I thought, my God, I'm going to lose another dog. And we went home, and in true style, my husband, who's in medicine, he went researching for 48 hours. I went to bed and cried for 48 hours, right? I just shut down, and he walked in and he says, not one more piece of kibbles to cross their lips. And I go, oh, okay. He goes, we're going to start feeding raw. I go, raw what? He goes, raw food. I go, what is that? I don't even know what that means, right? And he goes, we're going to give them raw meat and bones and some organs and whatever else we have to put in there. And I go, okay. So I started looking things up. And for me, there wasn't a lot out there at that point, and a lot of information. And I got really overwhelmed. And I remember my husband saying, because they're, PMR and BARF and, and it was like two sides of the fence, right? Like you were either this or this. And I was so scared to do something wrong. And he goes, just pick something, just start. He goes, and then we can mold it from there. So I did. And I literally took 3 bus bins, because we always have large dogs. And I put 80% meat of like hamburger meat and ground meat in one. And I put what looked like about 10% of that of ground bones. And I put, 10% of organ, and threw in some vegetables and called it a day. Right. And I went back to the vet, who she's since retired. She's so wonderful. And I said, well, I'm going to feed raw. And she says, well, she goes, I'll tell you why I don't necessarily support it, but she really did, right? She goes, is that people don't get it right. I said, okay, let me go do my homework and let me come back with a plan, right? And so I put together a plan, which included a lot of cancer supplements and some things that were a little, off the grid type supplements. And I went back, and she says, I love this. And she goes, I 100% support you. And I go, but I thought you didn't support raw. She goes, I was just seeing if you'd go do it. I'm like, okay. So Norman lived about 3.5 months. And his whole leg was riddled with holes with bone cancer. And shortly after that, literally right after, that was in 2013. Right after that, my basset hound who'd been kibble fed for 11 years. And just to back up, because one of you, we talk about the good kibble, right? Because that's the story we still hear every day. What's a good kibble, or I'm feeding a good kibble. And with all my lab and my Mastiff, we paid a lot of money, right? We paid because we equated good with the dollar sign, right? And the more expensive it was, the better it was. And that just wasn't the case. And so anyways, Oliver got diagnosed with end-stage kidney cancer maybe a month after Norman died. And, so we'd already started on raw, and we did, they went in and found one of his kidneys was completely covered because he kept getting UTIs. Well, that little beast lasted for 4 more years, and with a great life. And we didn't do any alternative treatments because I always, he was getting older anyway. And to this day, I don't know if it was the cancer or him being 15 years old, right? And I tell people that story. I don't tell it a lot because I don't want to give people false hopes ever, right? I think that's a pretty unique story to be in stage 4, end stage cancer, and, pull out another 4 years is not the norm. But, I do think of us switching. And then a year after, so in 2013, I ended up going to, because we got another Mastiff, and who we still have. He's 14 this year, 14 years old. Yeah. And he's just the bomb, and just still does so good. He's slowing up a little bit, but I went to a company out here, and I said, look, I was working 24-hour shifts as a 911 dispatcher, and I went to the company. I said, look, I'll buy 1,000 pounds of food. I don't care. Can you just get me food, get me a deal? Because I had needed to feed so much. And I said, I just don't have time. I'm exhausted. And we started talking about cancer. And she says, why aren't you doing this? I go, do what? She goes, why don't you have a company? And I go, are you out of your mind? I go, I can't. I'm exhausted. I can't. No, it's absolutely off the table. So she basically kept needling at me for a good 6 months. And she goes, look, I'll formulate for you. We'll manufacture, blah, blah, blah. And that's how my company basically landed in my lap, really. And what it did is, it's not because I wanted a raw dog food company. It afforded me to help other people with cancer, metabolic disease, and so forth, right? It wasn't about, I always tell people, it's not about the money, because I'm still waiting for a paycheck, 10 years later. So you see all these people getting into business with it, and I'm like, oh, it's not what you think it is. But it did allow me to be able to throw myself into constant learning, new things, and working with people and their dogs. So that's how we got into this. So we started up the company in 2014, and that's how we got in. It was really it was a fluke. I mean, it wasn't a fluke. It was at the expense of my dog, sadly, right? Yeah. I don't know about you guys. Well, you guys all sound like that I don't know that had Norman and we lost Parker to cancer, I don't know if I would have been there, right? If someone would have come up to me and said, feed raw.
Well, I'm curious to know, it's like when it comes to raw feeding, one of the things that I experienced in the beginning was the complete overwhelm, because even though there wasn't as much information out there as there is today about raw, one of you guys mentioned there wasn't that many brands back there as today. They're falling from the trees. But I was so completely overwhelmed. And I expected that to change with the more people that were coming into the community. But that is still so much the same thing. And I was wondering, do you guys see that too? Just like where people are completely overwhelmed?
100%.
So Jessica, you have a co-op. So what do you see when you get like new members?
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we are the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, so I would say a huge chunk of the people who come to our co-op are new to raw feeding. And usually it's because they have a dog with some sort of chronic illness. Usually it's anything from a digestive issue to allergies, just anything like that, where they're looking to diet to help. And one of the things that I like to point them towards is, our co-op, we currently buy from Albright's, and we have been also purchasing from Almost Pride. So it's kind of two companies that offer AFCO complete meals, but then they also offer like what I call the pieces and parts for doing it yourself if you want to kind of customize your diet. Yeah. And I tend to point the new people towards the AFCO complete diets. I say, if you want to start raw feeding now, let's just go with something that's already formulated, as long as your dog's not allergic to anything in these grinds. And then you can take your time to do your research. And then if you want to start playing with doing it yourself, you have that time and flexibility. You don't feel the pressure to, go to the grocery store and say, okay, I need chicken thighs and I need gizzards and I need hearts and I need a liver. And, it's just all these things that, can be really overwhelming, because on top of all of that, you have to do math.
And math is hard. Like I swear I had these Excel spreadsheets at one point where I was like, had all these formulas in there and trying to figure out, and I looked at it and I was like, I did enough math in college and I did enough math in my regular job. I don't want to do this like in my free time. I just don't want to. So that's kind of where I point them. And the other place I point them is to Keep the Tail Wagging, because
Aww.
I feel like your content is so friendly to people who are new to Raw. And that's, I found your content, quite a while ago. It was actually when some of the Facebook groups were still active. And, I really loved the way that you write and how, like, it's just easy to understand. So that's another place I point them to. And then if for the ones who really want to like do it themselves, I point them to, I love Dr. Judy Morgan's books. I think that those have some great, easy to understand recipes. And then I think Dr. Becker also has some recipes out there that you can get. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, those are kind of the places that I point my new people to. And, they've been pretty happy with it. It's just, I think the hardest part about raw feeding is, making it something you can do every day, making it sustainable, something that, in your day-to-day routine, it's not a burden to you. Yeah. And so that's, part of it is like, even just like, I have a private Facebook group for my co-op where we can like exchange ideas and stuff. And I say, what's hard for you? And I share what I do for my dogs and how I, portion their meals out and, what my freezer looks like. And, people can kind of get their own ideas or exchange that way too. And it's about what's doable,
Yeah. Even though it's been 10 years, I've had the blog, I have 3 books now. The person who keeps me from getting to overwhelm is Krista, because we met, I don't know what year it was that we met, maybe 2017, I think, we met in Vegas at Super Zoo. And the 2 crazy cat ladies, they have an annual party. And we went to the first one, which was just at their house. And it was a small group of us. And that's where I met Krista, Gregory, Cole Harrington, Jeff Deary was there. Someone else was there. I forget his name right now, but he owns Growly's pet store in Vancouver, Canada.
Oh, Neil.
Neil. Yes. And so, we were all there having a great time. And there's 2 things that Krista has said to me repeatedly over the years. And one is when you're talking about yourself more than you're talking about the dogs, then it's time to take a step back and think about if you still want to do this. And the second thing is, what would happen if your dogs were wild? So when I'm like getting into my head, because I remember, we have to start balancing fats. And, Dogs Naturally magazine, there was a time when they had a really good way of just twisting everything, and all of us would lose our mind on social media, because it's just like, what? And, and then Krista, or even someone else sometimes, but mostly Krista, would be like, do you think that that's what the wolves are doing? And I would dial it back a little bit. And so that's how I'm able to just take new information and just look at it like, oh, that's really interesting. File it away in my mental Rolodex and move on with my day, rather than having my head explode like it used to.
I feel like we balance each other. Certainly. That's, definitely a 2-way street. And to add on to that, I mean, I remember, and I want to say I'm right. As much as I don't want to say it, one of the things that kind of concerned me about 4 years ago, maybe 5, is people started coming out with these bowls that were beautiful and had 422 ingredients in them. And I'm like, people can't do this, right?
All perfectly organized.
Oh, and it's and they were,
and it looks like a serial killer was here.
Literally, I remember counting this one girl's bowl one day, and she had 22 things in it, and I'm like, with a duck ball and a, ostrich eyeball, just all this crap that people can't get. And to me, I'm that company, right? My customer base is people that are just getting by and can just afford raw, right? My stuff isn't grass-fed, grass-finished. That's not my game. We're grass-fed. We're grain-finished in the last couple weeks, right? We have great sourcing, but I want people to be able to afford it, right? And that's my target audience. And what was scaring me about, people starting to learn, Pet Food had come out and a lot of people were learning about it. And I'm like, we are going to scare people straight back to a bag of kibble. And we did, right? Because A, these things were not sourceable. And B, not everybody had a farm down the street where they could say, hey, throw me an eyeball when you put your cow down.
And just for the record, I do have a farm down the street, and I have never, ever, ever asked them for any kind of parts of anything.
I have a farm down the
I'm
street,
not the girl.
I have asked them for parts, and I can't get them.
Well, that's what's so funny about it is, Krista, you and I have had this conversation so many times over the years. And I understand that a lot of people, because you and I and Gabrielle Joy talked about this a couple of years ago, where these bowls are put out there beautifully to show us, like to inspire us, to give us ideas of what we can feed our dogs. But that's not what the caption says. And so many people who are new to raw feeding aspire to these bowls. And so, Krista, your customer base, and same thing with you, Jessica, your customer base are people who are new to raw, people who are, on a budget. That's just not something that they can aspire to. That's my readership, the same thing. And I can tell you at least once a month, I get an email from someone who is they're throwing in the towel because for months they've been trying to replicate these bowls that they see on Instagram. And so this is why I recently started just doing videos showing me putting together meals, because my meals aren't pretty. I'm not trying to make them pretty. I'm not trying to make them balanced. I'm just trying to feed my dogs fresh food and do the best that I can, simply because, those meals are awesome. And I do get ideas like, oh, I never thought I could feed that to my dogs. But I wish that the message was made more clear that this is just to show you. Because I know one person, I can't remember who it was, but it was years ago in a raw feeding group said, yeah, I just do that for the picture. What they actually eat is all mixed up, messed up together. That's actually, I'm not doing that every single meal and presenting it to my dog like a 5-star restaurant. But it's, for the person who's new to raw feeding, that isn't clear.
Yeah. And it's scary looking too, right? Like when you can't source certain things.
I've been feeding raw for 10 years and I am still kind of a beginner, at that level, because I'm not putting 22 different things in my bowl. And I've always shied away from, I have never shared our dog's food bowl because I'm like, I don't know, it's like
we need to start
a lump of stuff,
I swear we need to start an ugly raw bowl movement to show that this is what it really looks like. It does not look like that. I mean, yeah, there are some people who I'm sure it does, but no, in reality, this is what God, I'm creating a meme tonight.
I'm here for it. I will post for Raw Feeding Week. I will post an ugly raw feeding bowl.
Thank you.
We need a competition for who has the ugliest, because I think my 17-year-old American Eskimo might win his bowl. It makes my husband gag when he sees it because he's missing most of his teeth. So what I do is I take this grind, right? And then I add water to it so he can drink it like a meat smoothie. And it's just the grossest thing you've ever seen. But then I put he gets all these supplements on top for his joints and all of, his healthy stuff. And it's just, it looks like throw up. It's terrible, but he loves it. And he's 17 and he's still, he's still with us.
It's
so
working,
there's that.
right? It's working. And that's what I think that, another problem with these bowls is that not every dog, in fact, every dog is different, and we need to feed the dog, and they need to be fed literally from the inside out, right? And not like, oh, I've got to mimic this bowl, or I have to have this, that, and the other. I mean, there's a few basic rules that we know, and you guys may completely disagree with me, but it's a theory that I've had for 10 years and I'm still there, is that nobody knows what a dog needs. We do not have studies. We do not have the proper research that's going to take years. And I break down studies. I like looking at them. My husband's been published 5 times medically, so I've got a little bit of a, learning curve with that, but I like looking at them. And at the end of the day, and if you guys are feeding through formulators, that we've got a lot of empty holes in the maximum values, right? And so until we have all those holes filled in, we don't know what a dog needs yet. And so we do the best we can with our dogs. Each one's going to be a little different. I do feed our food, but I add in some things, right, for each dog. And I have my customers adding in. I'm a huge proponent of fat. I'm so big on fat. I can't have my formulas that way because I would have some dogs blowing ass every day, right? That's just not appropriate, right? Or if we have pancreatitis dogs. And so, I like to work with all my customers and say, okay, let's address this, let's address that. And I'm not a vet, I'm not a scientist. I always tell people, they'll go, oh, you're the expert. I go, let me tell you the one thing I'm an expert at is losing dogs to cancer. I win. I'm the best. And so I just want to not lose any more dogs. And knock on wood, I've not had a cancer diagnosis in 10 years. And so is it raw? I don't know. Nothing is absolute, right? Is it sheer luck? I don't think so. But I think we have to continue that message, is that each bowl is not for every single dog. And when we put out these bowls, either people are going to run this way or be feeding their dogs something that maybe they shouldn't have, right? And so,
or my thing is that, and this is from my experience in the beginning, is you look at all these ingredients and you just feed what you can get. And so you have no idea. You're just throwing stuff at the wall and you have no idea what you're doing. And I think that goes back to veterinarians being so wary of raw feeding. I mean, I know that there's many reasons why they are, but one of the main reasons out of all the veterinarians I've reached out to ask this question is like what you said in the beginning, Krista. I just don't think you'll do it right. I don't think you'll do the homework. I don't think you'll make sure that you understand what your dog needs. And this is why I didn't put recipes in my newest book. I'm getting that question. Do you have recipes? Do you have recipes? And I'm like, no, because I don't know your dog. I don't know what your dog needs. I know what my dogs need. I can tell you what I'm feeding my dog, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want you to think that this is this general recipe that goes for all dogs. It took me 10 years to get here. And I know it works for my dogs. But, there are so many things when it comes to feeding dogs and formulating for dogs. I have so much respect for people who can do that successfully without harming a dog, because it's not just your dog's breed and size and sex, but it's also where you live. And most of the time, probably 99.9% of the time, no one is going to go and have like a base measure of the dog done, have them nutrient tested to see like where are they today, and so what can we adjust to, because that costs a lot of money. And on top of that, if a dog has any type of health issue, there are just a lot of health issues that we don't even think to mention because it's just we're so used to dealing with it. Or even worse, we're told that it's normal. So a dog having loose stool and diarrhea, my veterinarian told me, oh, that's just dogs. Or same thing with cats that vomit all the time. Oh yeah, that's what cats do. Where it wasn't until the two crazy cat ladies did one of their tip of the days that was like, yeah, that's not normal. And you need to look into that I was like, oh.
Yeah, I don't think, and I'm going to throw this back at you ladies. My opinion, and I'd love to hear your feedback, I don't think dogs are that complicated, right? I don't think feeding needs to be this complicated. Kimberly and I joked around about getting t-shirts that say, wolves don't have calculators and wolves don't use spreadsheets, right? Mm-hmm. I respect what people do and their willingness to do it. I think we're making a 3-ring circus out of it. that doesn't, I have 300 acres behind me with a whole family of coyotes for 15 years. I know what they're eating. They're eating rabbit of diet, small rodents. We don't have naturally growing vegetation. We have weeds or, I'm in the high desert. I have a pretty good idea of what they're eating, and it's not that complicated, right? And I feel that I just want to know what you guys think about that. Do you think I could be way off the mark. Maybe it's way more intense or more than we think. I just have this feeling inside that we have stuck our little human fingers in it and stirred the pot and made it really, really complicated. And therefore people are going the other direction, which completely destroys the reason why I wanted to get into this, to help people's dogs and cats, whatever.
I guess I always think I don't balance my own meals and nutrient profiles every day. I don't do it any day ever. I mean, there was a period of time in my 20s where I think I lived on cheese pizza and, McDonald's chicken nuggets or something, you know what I mean? So yeah, I do think that it has been made very scary for people. But at the same time, I'm also not willing to try to formulate my own. And part of that is probably more of just convenience sake. I'm willing to, thaw things out, to weigh things out on a food scale, to, rotate what I got coming out of the freezer going into the fridge to get it defrosted. But I'm definitely not willing to make a bowl with 22 different ingredients. I'm not willing to start bringing my own calculators and spreadsheets into things. And I'll be honest, if there was Instagram when I first started feeding raw and I saw pictures like that, it probably would have made me run the other way, because I would have thought that was normal. And it was oh, I definitely can't do that, so I shouldn't even try. And I do wonder sometimes if that's what happens. And I've had to unfollow a lot of those kinds of accounts because, I'm just not the one that wants to look at that when I open my Instagram.
Krista, you know this. I 100% agree with you. I honestly think that it's so easy. And that's another reason why I do videos, just to show people it's so easy. Just like doing meal prep is so easy. It doesn't have to be complicated. What bothers me, and this is why I left all of the raw feeding groups, although shout out, Raw Feeding 101 is a really amazing group, but I just didn't want to be a part of a community where I'm seeing people discourage others from feeding raw. And I don't think they're doing it intentionally. There are situations where I've actually seen people say, you should just feed kibble then, because you're just not going to do it right. But that's so very rare. For the most part, what I see is that people are giving so much advice and they're well-intentioned. They want to give advice. They want to help you out. A woman shared on my wall something about something that she was feeding, and she got tons of comments just from a couple people, and they're having a great discussion. But I'm reading this, I disagree with 100% of what is being said here. This is a person who is new to raw feeding. This is not the conversation you should be having. And I understand that everyone's trying to be helpful, but I kind of feel like, maybe we should read the room and meet people where they are. And if someone is one of those people who loves to do research, loves to formulate, wants to know the macro and micros, wants to dive deep into that, then you can have that complicated high-level conversation with them. But if it's just someone who, hey, I want to do the best that I can for my dogs, I think this is right. What do you guys think? Do I need to miss something? And, she has liver in the food, and people are like, well, you need another secreting organ. And I'm like, according to whom? Oh, I'm sorry, the 80-10-10 graphic that we decided a long time ago was just a conversation that somehow landed into social media and we turned it into a Bible? No, do the best you can. I mean, granted, always be willing to be open-minded to new information as it comes to you. But I fed a completely unbalanced diet for 2 years to my dogs, not knowing, just doing the best that I could with what I can gain. I can tell you now, my dogs weren't getting multiple secreting organs. They were getting liver because that's what I could get. But it's just sort of let's just ease people in, because I feel like the retention would be so much better than if we throw them into the deep end and say, yay, that's not enough ingredients in your bowl.
I can tell you, like, I have a 4-year-old, like, human child here too. And her pediatrician has never once said, oh, are you balancing all of these macronutrients and are you doing this and that? They're like, is she eating protein? Great. Okay. Is she eating, this and that? But it's not, I don't have a spreadsheet for her, and it's kind of like, it's not an exact science, at least for us in our house. And I think one of the major things that has, come out of working with so many different people who come to us at various stages of raw feeding, it's feed the dog that you have in front of you. Because I've had such a variety of different situations where it's like they tried adding, this or that they learned about on a social media platform or in a group, and their dog had diarrhea or their dog wouldn't eat it, or, just it didn't work out. And I said, well, but is your dog healthy and happy eating what you're putting in front of him right now? Okay, then, we don't have to do more, or, we don't have to, try to replicate what we're seeing on Instagram, because it's like you see the Instagram model versus reality, and it's just two very different things. And I remember years ago just scrolling and seeing that stuff, and I was like, I think if I were to put one of those beautiful Instagram bowls in front of my very picky Spitz, he would turn his nose up at it. And it's like, we know our dogs, and, we know what's going to work for them. And, we're all doing the best we can, but it's all about being that welcoming community, because we want this community to grow. We want it to get airtime. And, ultimately we want the pet food industry to realize that this is the kind of stuff we want. But if we're not that welcoming, then it's not going to grow, and it's not going to, we're not going to get more in that community. So
100% agree. Yeah. I think, when it all comes down to it, I think that, and this is shaped, the content that I create. I mean, I always think that people who are new to raw feeding is like being a born again Christian, or someone who gave up drinking or gave up smoking and started working out. It's like you're feeling so great and you're just like feel so gung ho. You want everyone to experience the same thing. And you have to dial it back a little bit and recognize that not everyone is interested. And, one thing that I get a lot of people who are new to raw. People will tell me, during the Answers debacle, well, Answers is the only food my dog will eat. My dog is doing great on Answers. Do I have to stop feeding my dog Answers? And I'm like, no, you don't. Don't worry about what they're saying on social media. If this is working for your dog, you feed it until it stops working for your dog. It's, you have to put your dog first. I know that it's easy to get distracted, because I still get distracted by things that are happening on social media, but it's always take a step back and really think about what your dog needs, because, social media isn't always reality. I mean, we see that with everything with media. It's just not always real. And it definitely isn't taking into consideration one person's single dog. And, this same thing goes for, adding all these different ingredients, or even, feeding a hybrid diet. I get people who are like, I just can't afford to feed raw. And it's like, well, can you afford to add fresh food to the kibble? And I actually had someone send me a message saying how disappointed they were that I would encourage someone to do that. And that was just sort of like, okay. It's just like, I'm not going to beat someone up for feeding kibble if that's all they can feasibly do. And I think that attitude, thankfully, has gone away with the pandemic, because a lot of people found themselves in a place. I saw people change like their social media profile name or username because it had raw in it, because they weren't feeding raw anymore. And so they like changed it because it's like, I guess I shouldn't really use that. But it's just, we do the best that we can. And I think I miss the community where people surrounded themselves with you. I mean, not everyone. There were a lot of tools out there, but basically people wanted to see you do well. And I would get calls from people or, emails from people who were, one woman in particular told me that she would have panic attacks when she was doing meal prep because she was so terrified of doing it wrong. And she had a computer on the counter with the spreadsheet and she's measuring everything out. It took her hours to fix meals for her dogs because she was just so upset and just terrified. And I thought it was because she had this veterinarian that was berating her. No, it's because of the group that she was in, the raw feeding group that she was in. And I truly don't believe that people intend to make people feel that way. Those people in the group probably didn't realize she felt that way because, we bring our own drama and trauma into this as well. But that really broke my heart and shaped the content that I create because I never, ever, ever want to make someone be afraid to ask questions or anything because, we all know how much our animals mean to us. And, I want to always be open to helping someone if I can.
I think that one of the things that I feel pretty strongly about, sadly seems to be getting worse. We've got a lot of great leaders in this industry. I think people are holding on to every last word, without doing some, a little bit of research. And there seems to be a lack of this 3-letter word, I don't know. And people are afraid to say, I don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Let me find out for you if I can. Like there's something about, and then you get a call from, I got a call the other day and I started asking me different questions. Well, do you do this? Do you do that? Do you do this? And I'm like, whoa, you've been listening to your people, but it's like everyone's holding on to words that, well, this one says, and it's like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I disagree with that one. Right. And that's okay. Right. But nowhere because I feel like people have to have this thing. So for me, I would much rather go back next year and say, okay, well, what we've learned is this, right? So today I'll tell you, let's give everybody's dogs pink bubble gum because that's what's going to make them healthy, right? This is the answer. This is the absolute. And then a year from now, I have to go, oh, shoot, I was wrong, right? Maybe not talk in absolutes, right? And say, well, we've thought about, potentially having pink bubblegum on Wednesdays does great for their fur on their tail. But now we know, right? So you're constantly able to evolve because what I've learned is that we've got people in the community that won't say, I don't know, right? Or that
I was wrong.
The answer. And I think it's hurting dogs.
Yeah.
Ish.
I agree with you with that. And I also think that one thing that's hurting our community is the inability to disagree. So, yes. I mean, it's so just because I don't agree with what you're saying doesn't make you wrong.
Right.
It's just that all of us are coming to the table with our own pets in mind. So what you're saying doesn't work for me or my pets, or is it what I've learned in my research? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that I don't agree with that stance. And that's okay. So if someone comes to me and says, I've had that, my dogs won't eat vegetables. I don't feed vegetables. I don't think that there is any use for vegetables. That's fine. I disagree. We don't have to have a fight about it or argument about it,
No.
And the other thing is not questioning things. I think that and I have been guilty of this where someone who I think is an authority, if they say that this is fact or this study said A, B, and C, that's as far as my mind goes, is I read their status update and that's all it is. And after the pandemic, I actually started reading studies because I wanted to, and not to question it, just because I wanted to learn more and see how this applied to my dogs. And would find that their take on the study was completely different than my take. Again, it doesn't make them wrong and me right. It's just that we're two different people with two different perspectives. We should be able to have a respectful conversation, just saying, oh, well, that's not what I got. This is what I got. Oh, that's interesting. That's, and to have a back and forth. And it's sad to me that we can't do that. That when, I'll have people copying, pasting entire blog posts into a comment to prove me wrong. And it's just sort of like, I understand that you're passionate about this. I understand how important this topic is to you. I understand that you respect this person who wrote this article that you just hijacked and copied into a comment, copyright much. I don't agree with this person. I don't care who it is. I don't agree. And it's not that they're wrong. It's just that that's not how I see it. And I just, it really breaks my heart when I see people who, especially with my followers who I love. I have followers that I love. I look forward to seeing their comments and stuff. Now I block them because at some point in time over the past couple of years, something switched where we're now butting heads because, how dare you defend this brand? And I'm just sort of like, well, I like them and their food. My dogs do well on their food. That's all. That's as far as I go. I don't dive deep into ingredients and sourcing and things like that if I trust the brand. And I don't dive deep into ingredients and sourcings for brands that I will never feed because I don't see the point to it. So I'm okay with saying I don't know anything about that food. And nope, I'm not going to research it because I really think part of research is feeding the food to the dogs.
I think one thing that really comes to mind is, that it seems like people are not interested in coming to the table with like this mutual respect, and kind of having this, mutual, like, this is what I do and I respect that this is what you do. And let's have an open conversation, learn from each other. It really does. It, in a lot of these groups, feel like people come to proselytize or they come to just kind of get up on, their soapbox but they're not interested in hearing another viewpoint. And it's, I see this in other groups too, that are not even raw feeding related. Being a parent, I'm in a couple of Facebook groups for, parenting, and I had to remove myself from them because some of that is just, you think raw feeding is to be a hot button. It's like, oh my goodness. So it's just, I feel like there's some sort of decorum that, people just kind of leave out the door when they step into social media. And it's, it's saddening. And, kind of going back to your other point about, people who, especially during the pandemic, had to maybe start feeding kibble and, or doing half and half. And, a lot of the new people that come to me, cost is a concern. And it's about meeting them where they're at and what they can do. And I have plenty of people who, maybe breakfast is kibble and dinner is raw, or, whatever works for them. But it's, one person came to me and they said, I've been embarrassed to tell you that I feed kibble certain days of the week. And I said, you should never feel that way. You're doing the best you can. You're doing what's best for your dog and your situation. And, my big thing with, the group that I run is this is a judgment-free zone. And it's just, I think that I wish that, other areas of social media could, kind of leave the judgment at the door too.
Yeah. Well, because you never know what people are going through. Because, contrary to what we see on TikTok, not everyone shares every aspect of their lives on social media. And, another thing about my followers is the majority of the people who read my blog are my age and older. So we definitely aren't putting our business out there on Front Street because we were raised differently. And it is something where you don't talk about finances, and there are so many things you just don't discuss. And in this arena, it can make things a little difficult, especially when you see people posting incessantly about how terrible kibble is. And it's not that that message shouldn't be out there. It's just that for some people who are doing the best that they can, they're feeling like they can't be a member of this community because they still have to partially feed kibble. And
they will be chastised.
Yeah. I've seen 100%. People don't ask why. I mean, just like even with the conversation that was on my wall, I was looking through the comments and unless I missed it, I didn't see anyone asking, what type of dog do you have? Does your dog have any health issues? Everyone's throwing raw feeding advice at this person, but no one's actually taking time to learn about the dog. What do you have access to? Do you live in the city? Are you grossed out by eyeballs? I mean, because it's like maybe we're leading you down the wrong path. But yeah, it's one of those things where that's why I don't talk about kibble, because first of all, I don't feed it. So I feel like if I'm not feeding it, I shouldn't be talking about it. And two, I don't want anyone to feel like they can't come to me and ask me questions. I want to be a person that, regardless of what you're doing, I understand that you're doing what you think is best. And the other thing is the, quote unquote, good kibble. Some of the good kibble is insanely expensive. So let's stop
talk about that.
Telling people to buy this expensive kibble when they've just told you they can't afford to feed 100% raw. That is just,
yeah.
That has got to be maddening to get that advice.
Yeah.
There are kibbles that I have had people tell me they saved money switching from that to raw because the kibble was that expensive.
Yeah.
And yeah, I haven't really looked at kibble prices in a long time, but when somebody told me that a few months ago, I was like, wow, well, at least, I'm glad that this is, this is accessible, but I think it's, we live in this world where it's like, how many angels can you get to dance on the head of a pin? And it's like, we live in this world where it's either this, where you want everything, or it's not good enough. And, it's.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, so we're not talking all night, I was wondering if everyone can share like a piece of advice that either changed how they look at raw feeding for the better, or just a piece of advice for anyone listening who may be feeling a little overwhelmed with raw feeding. Krista, do you got something?
Well, I've always got something. I got a lot of things. If they're helpful or not, I don't know. Just to wrap up with what we've talked about, like, do the best you can, reach out to people. And I'm going to tell you, stay the hell off social media for one, but reach out to a company and talk with them and get somebody who will talk with you, right? And really keep it individualized. Don't beat yourself up that you're not doing it right. There's no wrong here. I mean, there could be wrong if you did it over a long period of time, but we all had to start somewhere. And guess what? Our dogs are all freaking still alive, right? And they're not running around with nutritional deficiencies. And reach out to someone that you trust that will talk to you. And, don't always get your information off social media from everybody, because they're just parroting what they've heard, which is fine, right? Just, you have to have a starting place. And I think, reach out to Kim, reach out to Erin, reach out to Jessica. Don't call me. I'm just kidding. You can call me. Totally, I'm kidding. People, we want to help people. We want to get people on the road, right? And I'll help anybody if they want to make their own. I don't care. I'm not going to charge anybody. I just want to get your dog healthy, right? I don't want anybody to feel the way I felt 3 times now, losing dogs to cancer. And not realistic, but it is my goal. So I think just reach out and watch where you're getting your information from, I think. And do what you're doing. It's your great job. You're doing great.
Erin, what type of advice would you give people?
Well, I'll tell you the one thing that I have learned that I have started incorporating over the last couple years particularly is to make sure that I'm rotating like brands and proteins, because sometimes if I can get a good deal or I have a standing order somewhere, I might get in the zone of just kind of always getting the same thing. And so I've really made a concerted effort over the last couple of years to make sure that I'm rotating some different things in and not always doing, turkey or something. But yeah, my advice is probably, all of us probably echo the same thing, is just, if you're feeling judged, if you're feeling overwhelmed, turn off whatever that is, whether it's that social media page, leave the group, unfollow, don't listen to that, because there are supportive and helpful people who want to cheer you on and want to see you do better and don't want to put you down and don't want to make you feel dumb, or, don't want to make themselves sound so much smarter and better than you. They just want to, there's a lot of people out here like, wonderful, I have an ugly bowl too. And I'm totally going to do that this week, because I do feel like I don't have something to add to the conversation because my bowl is just kind of gloppy, and like, but yeah, I want to normalize the gloppy bowl is yes. What I want to leave on.
What about you, Jessica?
I definitely would echo some of what Krista was saying, because, it's reach out to people, and, there's so many people out there who do want to help, and we do want to see you do well. And, it's the people who are running these companies, the companies that I order from and that, have all of these great products, they love to, help educate. And I've really found that if you call them and ask the questions, they are so happy to talk to you about it. Because at the end of the day, I think it's so important to remember why we all got into raw feeding, and it's because we love our dogs. That is, I feel like, so important to remember. We all do have something in common, no matter if you are a strict PMR feeder, or if you are, it has to be micronutrient balanced or this or that. It's like, well, we're all here because we love our dogs so much and we want them to live as long as possible. So, I think it's like, take a deep breath and just remember that's something that we all have in common. And then, just know that, there are people here cheering for you, and we're here to help, and we want to see you do well. So
Oh, I love this. I'm going to say ditto to everything that you guys have saying. And I think the one thing that I would add, which has already been said here, I wish I could remember who coined this phrase. There's a person out there that's claiming they coined it, but that's not true. But, feed the dog in front of you, because someone said that to me, and it was probably Krista said that to me years ago. And it changed my life, because then I stopped worrying about what other people were doing. And instead, I just looked at it as really good information. And so I would follow up with, ask more questions. That's one thing that really changed my experience when it comes to raw feeding and learning about raw feeding, is when someone shares a bowl, or when someone shares a picture of their dog, or someone says something, I don't know, about a food that they're feeding. Instead of judging, instead of telling them that they're wrong, instead of, going and getting a bunch of links and studies to prove that someone's wrong, ask a question. Because, I had this conversation with someone the other day where, what I share is from my perspective of feeding 4 dogs. It's not meant to be the Bible of how we're supposed to be feeding dogs. It's just what I do. And if you don't agree, don't do it. And my feelings won't be hurt, because I can't tell you what to do for your dogs, But one thing is, like, I have learned so much by just asking why someone added something to a bowl. Or do you ever worry if someone said, I can't remember what they did, but I asked them recently, do you ever worry about blank and blank? And they came back and they're like, yeah, no, I don't think that deeply into what I'm feeding about raw. And I'm like, ooh, I'm following you. But it's just like, ask questions. It's, you can have so many amazing conversations. You learn so much. It does not take away from what you're already doing. It only gives you great information, because I truly, truly believe that if I were very stubborn about, like, if I had the belief that dogs aren't picky, you're just not doing a good job feeding your dog, the next dog that I have would be the pickiest dog on the planet. And so I don't judge what other people do. I always remind myself, it's none of my damn business what someone else is feeding their dogs. What I can control is what's going on in my house. And I'm an open book. And so before I judge someone, I'd rather make a friend and have a conversation with them, because you never know when you're going to get that next aha moment that, like feed the dog in front of you.
Hear, hear.
I love it.
Me too.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. This was amazing.
Thank you for having us. It was fun. Good talk.